I had lived peacefully on my 5-acre property for years, content to enjoy the quiet hum of the countryside. The place was perfect. Open skies, a small pond I had built myself, and a deep underground well that supplied crystal clear water to my home and farm. Life was good until the local HOA decided I was a problem. The HOA, which governed the neighborhood bordering my property, had a reputation for arrogance and intimidation. Their president, a woman named Karen Thompson, ruled like a queen over her suburban subjects. She and her board members believed they had authority over everything within a half-mile radius, even beyond their actual jurisdiction. I wasn't part of the HOA, and that infuriated her. It started with small annoyances, letters demanding I comply with community aesthetics, as if I owed them anything, and constant visits from her goons trying to lecture me about neighborhood unity. I ignored them. But one morning I turned on my faucet and nothing came out. I checked the pumps, the filters, everything was normal. Then I walked outside and noticed the trench along my property line. My water line had been severed cleanly, the earth still freshly disturbed. At first I thought it was an accident, but then I found a laminated note staked in the dirt. In bold, smug handwriting it said, "Maybe next time you'll learn to cooperate with your community." The signature was unmistakable. Karen T., HOA president. My jaw clenched as I stood there, feeling the cold anger rise from my chest to my fingertips. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Because while my property was independent of the HOA, I also happened to own the private land uphill from them, the land that held the spring their entire community's reservoir drew water from. That's right. Every sip they drank came from my source. They had just declared war on the wrong man. I called a repair crew to fix my cut line, quietly taking pictures and video of the damage and that arrogant note. Karen probably thought she could bully me into compliance, but I wasn't going to play her game. I was going to end it on my terms. I spent the next few days in silence, repairing the water line and setting things in motion. Karen's smugness radiated even from a distance. She was likely bragging to her HOA board that she'd taught me a lesson. But little did she know, her neighborhood's dependence on my mountain spring was about to become her downfall. The local water company had a contract to draw from my land, a deal I inherited from the previous owner. That contract was up for renewal, and all I had to do was decide whether to extend it. The HOA paid nothing directly, their utility company did, but once I pulled the plug, that chain of supply would crumble. I scheduled a quiet visit with the water company's director, Mr. Alvarez, a practical man who knew how to listen. "You're the source owner, right?" he asked when I walked into his office. "I am," I replied. "And I'm considering suspending access for the subdivision downstream. My property was vandalized by their HOA. He frowned, understanding immediately. "That's serious. If you pull that water, they'll be dry in 2 days. Then maybe they'll learn respect," I said flatly. Within a week, the paperwork was finalized. On a crisp Monday morning, I made the call. The pumps feeding the HOA neighborhood's main reservoir were shut down. I didn't have to wait long. By Tuesday evening, the neighborhood group chats were in chaos. Sprinklers sputtered out mid-cycle. Faucets trickled dry. Panic spread like wildfire. Karen and her board members were on edge, marching door to door trying to calm angry residents. She even came to my gate, slamming on the buzzer and shouting through the speaker, "You can't do this! You're cutting off our water!" I pressed the button and replied calmly, "You cut mine first. Remember your note, Karen?" There was silence, followed by an indignant gasp before she stormed off. I watched from my porch, sipping bottled water, knowing this was just the beginning of her lesson in humility. By midweek, the neighborhood was in full-blown crisis. Residents couldn't shower, the lawns were browning, and complaints flooded the HOA office. News spread through local media about the mysterious water outage affecting the subdivision. Karen tried to spin a narrative, blaming the utility company for technical failures, but it didn't take long before word leaked that I was the landowner who had cut off supply. Legally. Angry homeowners began showing up at HOA meetings demanding answers. I drove by one evening just to see the chaos unfold. Karen stood at the front of the clubhouse, red-faced and sweating, as residents shouted questions at her. "You said you had control over the water system," one man yelled. "You said he'd comply," shouted another. Karen tried to save face, claiming she had taken steps to protect the community's interests, but everyone saw through her lies. The HOA's authority was crumbling faster than their lawns were drying. That night, I received a call from Mr. Alvarez. "They're begging us to negotiate," he said. "They're offering to pay double for emergency supply." I chuckled. "Tell them to apologize first. In writing." 2 days later, a letter arrived on my doorstep signed by the entire HOA board, apologizing for the misunderstanding and regrettable property damage. Of course, it wasn't genuine remorse. It was desperation. Still, I wasn't done yet. I wanted to ensure Karen never held that kind of power again. Using the footage I'd recorded of the vandalism and her written lesson note, I filed a police report and forwarded it to the HOA's insurance and the local press. By the next week, she was under investigation for property destruction and misconduct. Her empire was falling apart piece by piece, and I didn't have to lift a finger beyond what was lawful. It took nearly a month before the HOA regained access to their water supply, under strict conditions I personally outlined in a new contract. They were required to install additional security cameras, compensate me for all damages, and agree in writing never to interfere with my property again. Every board member signed the document in person, even Karen, though she could barely look me in the eye. Her once commanding voice was now meek and brittle. She'd been forced to step down as president, humiliated in front of the same residents she used to intimidate. The new HOA leadership sent a representative, a polite young man named Eric, who thanked me for helping the community recover. I smiled and told him, "Tell your neighbors to remember that respect flows both ways, just like water." From then on, peace returned. My repaired well worked flawlessly, my crops thrived, and my land remained untouched. Occasionally, I'd see a few of the former board members driving past my property, careful not to slow down or even glance in my direction. The spring continued to feed the town's reservoir, but now it did so under my terms. I learned something valuable through all this. Power doesn't come from aggression or control. It comes from knowing where the real source lies and being patient enough to use it wisely. Karen's arrogance had blinded her, but I had simply let her dig her own dry well. In the end, the HOA that tried to teach me a lesson became a cautionary tale in their own neighborhood. People started joking that they'd better not anger the man who owns the water. I didn't need revenge anymore. I'd already won, quietly, legally, and completely. And every time I turned on my faucet and watched the clean water flow, it reminded me that justice, like a spring, always finds its way back.